Hi, everybody. This is Brett Hancock. I was just doing some thinking here on the whole conversation of evolution versus intelligent design, and thinking about something I don't think I've ever thought about before, and that is that outside of biological life or organic life or things that would be recognized as biology or life. I mean, bios, and in Greek, means life. And so that's where the word biology comes from, study of life. But in this universe that we can observe, of course, not very many of us have left the planet, but within our, realm of observation and stuff, we see basically two classifications. There's these amazingly sophisticated systems of what would be fall in the category of biology, of life, organic systems. And then there's things outside of that. So what I want to do is I want to take what we observe that is claimed by evolutionists, that an undirected process, there's no outside architect, the laws of probability and randomness that those of us that have gone down the road of math, and there's people are so much more into it. I mean, it's been many years since I've really spent much time in engineering school with math and stuff, and all that stuff, differential equations, calculus, and trigonometry, and all that stuff. Did very well in it, but it's been a number of years. But anyway, for statistics, all that stuff. But anyway, so when we apply those same rules, that is believed that, well, yeah, given billions of years, these things could organize themselves and stuff. So if that's true, the organization that we see, that is, where's the question? Where'd that come from, right? Especially when you talk about DNA and information that's in the cell, in the nucleus of the cell. But when you look at that organization in biology, now let's step outside of biology and apply that to inorganic systems, non-biological systems. In other words, everything else, right? Just roads and dirt. In other words, not the construction of buildings and things that men have done, but just the things that we see out in nature, right? So, trees and plants, you'd have to subtract from all that because all that stuff falls in the category of biology. So we're talking about things that don't have DNA. Plants and animals, everything that is life has DNA. Bacteria, everything that is fall in the category of life has DNA. So separate that stuff and the things outside of that, whether it's rocks and dirt and mountains and all those sorts of things. Do we really find the organization that looks like order, that would say, whoa, man, that's highly improbable? And that's my question. Why don't we find, if it's really true that at the not at the most low level, even below atomic particles, under atoms, we got gamma, alpha, beta, rays and particles and all that kind of stuff, or whatever. But let's just stick with atomic particles, atoms themselves, as the building blocks of discussion, both in organic systems and inorganic systems, both biology and non-biological systems. The basic building blocks are these atomic particles that are just driven by, electromagnetic forces. Where the least path of resistance, that's where they go. There's no intelligence in them. To our knowledge, there's no intelligence in both sides, both camps, evolutionists and non-evolutionists. We believe this. At least I've never heard anyone's not believe this, right? So when we understand these brainless atomic building blocks, or bricks that build everything, why would they organize themselves in things that would fall in biology? It's very sophisticated systems. When it comes to probabilities and the type of applying of statistical probabilities in math that casinos make tons of money off of, and in that whole realm and discipline or whatever, to really study and look at the probabilities and improbability of those sorts of things occurring, applying that outside of biology to other things, dirt, mountains, oceans, all these sorts of things. And again, you got to subtract fish and all those things that fall into the category of biology. Talking about things that aren't in biology, okay? So I hope you're following me, tracking with me here. Why don't we see those kind of sophisticated systems have evolved? In other words, I'll use an example. Things like maybe a bridge. A bridge, like say the Golden Gate Bridge in San Francisco, is very impressive. If we were to see things like that, I'm just using that as an example, things like that just evolved over billions of years, then we would say, well, we observe it outside of biology, we observe it in biology. This is what we observe in our everyday experience, but we don't. We only see biology, the order, the levels of order. And I hope you understand what I mean by that, but it's basically scientists and engineers, when we're looking at things that are disordered versus order. Everything that we observe with order always is done by effort and energy and intelligence, and it takes effort to organize things. We're talking about basically about order. We're talking about things that are organized. So they're organized such a way that shows intelligence, and that sort of thing. So why don't we find that kind of order that we would see like in a bridge? Why don't we find those things just happening, within the same time frame? Why don't we see organic and inorganic systems being well ordered like that? Why do we see exclusively the realm of biology that is basically comes down to the seed of DNA, the information that's in the DNA that is off the charts? I mean, I'm a programmer myself. It's off the charts in terms of computer code and programming code and stuff. The amount of complexity and stuff. I mean, even Bill Gates talks about this. Why don't we see that outside? Why do when we see pyramids that we know there was an intelligence that did that a long time ago? And of course, there's a whole discipline of archaeologists and stuff, whatever. But why don't they ever say, hey, this just happened? Or why does SETI, which is Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, as they've been scanning the airwaves for decades, since the 1960s, or Carl Sagan, I think he was a big proponent that helped push that thing through Congress and get that approved or whatever, scanning the airwaves for these improbable radio RF frequency signals. If we find a mathematical pattern, almost like let's go back a couple centuries, where, when they were building the railroads in, the Old West here in the United States, they were using telegraph systems, and they were sending these signals and series of dots and dashes, kind of things where it's like beep, 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 beep. This would be an ordered pattern of those things sent over the wire, and the recipient on the far end would decode that message, and they would go, oh, okay, here's the message, and it would go to who it was addressed to and all that kind of stuff. So we see that in the DNA, even more, much more complicated than that. But with that sort of idea, why don't we see that outside of biology? Why don't we see that in nature? So that's the idea I'm putting forth, just something to think about. My conclusion is, as you can tell by my channel, it's intelligence. There was an intelligent designer that did all these things, and he leaves clues so that we'd be persuaded, and the claims of the Bible so we'd be persuaded. And the Bible says those that aren't persuaded, there's eternal fire and destruction and consequences for that. Because for God, if it's really true that God came forth from himself and begat his son, and they created all things together, and in the intention that the Bible lays out was for him to give all these things to his son, and that he would send his son, in the flesh to actually save us and to suffer like he did. Because, according to the Bible and studying the early Christians of the first and second centuries, and the second and third centuries and their writings, and understanding how they understood what the Bible teaches, there's angels, there's these celestial beings that are with God, that are invisible. They're not in the visible spectrum of light. Very high frequency signal, well above cell phone, frequency and stuff. And our eyes detect that narrow band of RF energy. In our ears at a much lower band, very low frequency. It's tuned to those frequencies, which is very coincidental, extremely. And so, but, those celestial beings, that some of them went apostate on God, and that they basically are throwing human beings under the bus. And so this world is messed up the way it is because of them. And so Jesus, the name given for the Son as he came here in the flesh, and fulfilling other prophecies to Abraham and to King David, that he would come in the flesh and he would rescue us from them, and to rescue us from the evil that they lead human beings into. And so if we don't go after the Savior, that the claims of the Bible is not being persuaded of that it leads to eternal destruction. And if it's true, you got to admit that if God really sent his son to suffer the way he did, to have this perfect plan in such a way to woo our hearts, to lead us in that direction of following the truth, and to actually follow him and his teachings, truly make a man good. All you got to do is read the Sermon on the Mount and say, wow, if people really follow this, we wouldn't need prisons and judicial systems and all these things, because there would be nobody mistreating each other. Just encourage you, if you haven't really taken that, you can be an antagonist against Christianity, but forget what people do people that claim to be Christian, set that aside. Because really, I mean, everybody has free choice. Everybody can decide what they're going to do. They can claim a Christian all day long. But if they don't really do what Jesus taught, well, they're just actually making Christianity look bad. So set that aside and just look at what Jesus teaches in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. Read those teachings and just imagine. Just meditate for a while. Imagine if everybody started doing what Jesus is teaching here, the chaos in the world will go away, right? So anyway, so if that's true, it would make sense that the suffering that Christ went through, that his son went through, that God's son went through to rescue us from them, from the apostate angels, if we didn't go after it and we rejected it, not to mention God is, according to the claims of the Bible, given us all these things that we enjoy in life, even the fact that we even exist, enjoy our whole life, and we reject all these things of God. It makes sense that God would be upset with us, especially with all the suffering that his son went through and stuff. So anyway, I'm just going to stop this video there. I just want to put that forth, something to think about. All right, God bless.